This is Jim from Portage M&A Advisory, and you're listening to the Selling Successfully podcast, the show that simplifies selling your business for those thinking about moving into the next chapter of life. If you like what you hear, please follow or subscribe to find us easily and listen again. We're here when you need us. Hi, everybody. Today I've got my partner, Ryan.buist, back in the hot seat to talk all about the things and the phases involved in selling your business. So thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to give you listeners a sneak peek or a more in-depth look at what the phases really involve, because there is some significant meat involved in the sale of your business. We know that the sale of the business is complex. It can be very challenging. It oftentimes, can be perceived as very daunting. But at the end of the day, what you're going to find is it's not that scary. And if you follow the process, it's something that's very achievable for all business owners. So let's dive into things. Let's take a look at the steps involved in selling your business. So let's start with business valuation. Phase one, business appraisals and valuation. Can you walk us through what this looks like and what folks need to be thinking about during this phase?
Yeah, and first of all, let's take it back a little bit. The reason we want to kind of highlight all this is just because we want people to know what those processes are into selling your business. And everyone always asks, it's the biggest question people ask, what's it going to look like to sell your business? And like you said, that first step is the valuation. We want to make sure that we're aligned with you on what we think the business can sell for. So we're really going to be asking for a lot of information from you up front. This is going to be, there really is no charge at this point because we want to make sure there's an alignment, right? So we'll do that valuation. We'll look at what this business is worth, and then we'll communicate that and how we got to that valuation. Again, we don't go to market with the price, but we know that the price will be somewhere in that range. And if everyone's okay with that kind of number, we can move on to further stages.
Right. So, step one is us really just understanding the business. We're obviously, trying to grasp what it is that you do, your customers, who you're selling to, who your staff members are, and that sort of thing. Why is that important?
Yeah, the really reason we need to grasp it is because we need to know, is it saleable? And we need for you to know, is it saleable? Is this business saleable? And those items will tell us if it's saleable, but they'll also tell us what's the value of that business. So what are the risk drivers in that business? What's the story if we have to sell this business that we need to actually, convey to the market? Plus, at this stage, we also like to talk to our contacts, a lot of the banks, and see if they'll finance this deal. So we need an understanding of what makes this business tick. So when we're talking with our bank and our contacts, we can say, this is a little bit about the business. This is the risk involved in the business. Is this something you would finance?
Right. And I guess the other key piece too, at the end of it, is there is an analysis that is being done. We're looking at the tangibles, the intangibles, the things that make the business tick. We're looking at, competition. We're looking at sustainability moving forward and all these sorts of things. Tell me a little bit more about the analysis and what that will provide folks.
Yeah, so the analysis is, like we said, it's really just digging into everything about that business, the financials, you talk about the intangibles. What's the customers look like? What do the suppliers look like? What do any of those aspects that make this business what it is, like what are those aspects? And do they drive value? Is there worth to them? And we're also going to be looking at, your hard assets, like your equipment. What is that worth? So sometimes that's where we have to hire an outside appraiser and say, hey, can you value this equipment? Because a lot of times, the higher that equipment appraisal is, the more financing you get from a bank, and the higher that value of that business will ultimately be.
Right. So I guess, this is obviously a really key phase in ensuring that your business is saleable. You understand what the value is. You understand really, perhaps you may even learn a little bit more about your business in terms of how it's viewed from a third party. What are people typically really surprised to hear or learn at this stage?
You get two responses usually. Oh, I can't believe it's worth that much, or I think it's worth 10 times that much. Like, those are really usually your two answers, and then they're just surprised at what drives the value, right? Sometimes they're really surprised that a high customer reliance doesn't always negatively affect the business, because there's certain businesses where you made a choice to do that, but you could easily replace that customer if they left. So a lot of times there is surprise just in the whole, how did you get to that value? And I like, at this point, it's also good to know if you do this early enough, say 5 years ahead of time, and we do like to start our process really early, you can change that value. You can do other things that might increase that value. So I know we're saying it's the process of selling your business, but this process can start 5 years prior to a sale.
Right. Talk to me about the deal structure, because I find this is probably one of the most interesting pieces to a seller. Oftentimes, the perception is you can get 100% of the sale price on close, like selling a house. Yep. But what is the reality? What are we seeing out there?
Yeah, and we always get this concern with sellers. They don't want to have a vendor note, but the reality is, in the lower mid market where we operate, those businesses that have a million to 5 million in EBITDA, value of $5 to say $25 million, you're going to have on close, you're probably going to get about 80% of the value. The bank is going to finance 60%, the buyer will give 20%, and you're going to have a vendor note for the other 20%. So, and basically, if you're not aware, a vendor note is almost like you're a second bank. So you will get an interest rate on that bank, and you'll have security against that vendor note. It's not an earnout, so it's not like the company has to hit certain numbers, but you really are, you're there to support the purchase. And everyone always thinks, oh, this is driven by the buyers. They don't want to put money in. A lot of times it's actually driven by the banks. The banks are the ones that say, I want to make sure that seller is a little bit tied in that business after the sale. So we get a little more comfortable if there's a vendor note, and therefore we can actually lend more, or we won't even lend at all if they're not going to be tied. So if an issue does occur down the road, they know that seller is still going to be involved as long as that vendor note is there.
Right. So really the key takeaway at the end of the day is sellers will likely get 80% of the proceeds, perhaps a little bit more on closing, and then they've got to ride out the promissory note to capture the full value of their business. All right, so let's say we've now got the upfront value. We know what the deal structure looks like. We're aligned with the seller. You as a seller, feel comfortable with the valuation. I mean, next steps is really getting the engagement agreement. Is there anything else folks need to be aware of at this point?
No, really it is that engagement letter, and we're going to sign so that we can actually start the process. People always ask, well, what's the commission going to be? Like, what are you charging us on this? And we have a small upfront fee, and then we have a commission based only if we sell the business. And that price that we set the value of the business at will really determine what that commission rate is. And we use a model that is very standard in the industry, so our prices won't be shocking because we're very competitive with everyone else in a similar lower mid market.
Right. So at the end of the day, it's important that there's alignment going to market. We're sharing some of the risk in that, we're obviously not charging a full amount up front. We're only making money when the business closes at the end of the day. And that engagement agreement just lays out the steps we're going to take in selling the business. So once this piece is done, we're aligned, we've got the engagement agreement signed. Now it comes down to marketing. Can you talk a little bit about what this process looks like?
Yeah, this is probably the fun part for a seller. Really not, but this is where they're going to have to get us a lot of information, right? So really we're building the information to go to market. And we generally take about 2 months for this process. And the reason we do is we want to make sure not only are we building all the information we need for marketing, but all the information will be there for due diligence. We want to make sure when we truly go to market, there's nothing that's going to change that price once an LOI is signed. So we do a lot of research, and we'll have a lot of questions to the seller, and they're going to have to. We actually set it up that we generally have weekly calls with the actual seller to make sure we're getting those key pieces of information correct, and that we're actually creating the marketing material that reflects the business correctly.
Right. So help me understand this. First, we do an appraisal. We ask for information. Now you're asking for more information to put the marketing material together. Would you say this is the most onerous phase, I guess, for the seller?
Definitely it's the most onerous phase for the seller. I mean, there's just going to be a lot of information we require. And generally, the bookkeeper, the accountant internally don't know about the sale, right? So this is where the owner has to really do that work themselves, right? So, we're not expecting it overnight, but the quicker we get that information, the quicker we can truly go to market. So it does take time, and it can feel like a lot at that point, but we really do need that information. And we've noticed that if you don't get it correct, the process gets pushed even further. So you might as well get us that as quickly as you can and get it right the first time, than us trying to piece something together that's not correct.
Right. Let's talk about the specifics of the marketing material. So we've got the teaser, and we've got the SIM, or the confidential information memorandum. How are you going to reach out to buyers? What are they going to see? And what is this teaser and SIM that we talk about?
Yeah, great. So really, the first piece of information, while we're building all this marketing, we are creating a teaser and SIM at the same time. But really, the first thing we go to market with is the teaser. And really, it's a document that we can pass on to prospective buyers, where we're not really saying the actual name of the company that's for sale. We're giving them enough on a one-page document that's saying, there's a business in this general industry, in this general location, and here are some of the financial figures, very high level. Nothing that anyone could actually figure out what business is actually for sale. And if they're interested, they will say, we want more information. Right? And at that point, we make them sign an NDA, and then we can give them the full document. This document is like a 60, 70-page document, and it's really highlighting everything about the business. It actually tells the business's name. It'll say, what the customer alliance is. It'll talk about employees. It'll talk about past financial results. It'll talk about things that you can do to improve the business. It'll talk about a whole list of different things. And it's really to highlight to the buyer, this is everything you should need to know about the business, so that you can actually put an offer down and buy the business.
Right. So going back to the teaser, is the price of the business listed?
We never go to market with a price, ever. We know a general idea from the valuation, what we think the business will sell for, but we would never put a price out there. Our goal is to obviously get the highest price we can possibly get.
Right. So at the end of the day, we're not listing the price. We want the market to truly determine what the value of the business is. How do you ensure and remove some of these tire kickers if the sale price isn't listed?
Yeah, so really, even before, once we get the teaser and they say, hey, I want that extra information, we'll jump on that phone call and really start to ask them some questions. Might give us an idea of where their price is, might give us an idea, have they purchased a business before? Are they actually capable of purchasing a business? Plus, 90% of the time, they've been referred by somebody else, and we can ask those people, hey, are these, good buyers? What's the case? Can they actually do this? And so we get a lot of insight prior to actually giving them the SIM. So a lot of times, we might get 10 people reach out, 3 or 4 of them we've kicked out of the process before it even starts.
Right. So there's a lot of vetting, and there's there's certainly some assurance provided that, we're not going to let everyone see the pertinent details of the business.
Exactly. And what we also do is we actually run by the list with the seller. So if it's a competitor and you really don't want that person buying the business, we would say, are you okay, them seeing them? They say, no, we're like, okay, then we'll take them out of the picture. And so that usually gives the seller some confidence. And honestly, the information is not going to anyone that's going to leak any information. So it really is secure, and we'll really run the process to weed those people out that might cause problems in the future.
So this leads us to the next section, which is probably the most common question we get. Where do buyers come from? How do you find them? What's the process? Ryan, let's talk about the marketing campaign. How do we go and identify buyers, and how do buyers find us?
Yeah. So we're always getting buyers reaching out to us and saying, hey, I'm interested in a business in this industry, and if anything ever comes into that you're selling, let us know, right? So we have a huge database with private equity, family offices, and we've always vetted them. So we've already had a phone call with them, and people aren't just reaching out and we're just throwing them in our database. No, we've had a phone call, make sure that they're actual buyers that we want to deal with. And so we have that massive database. Plus, we're also going to look at whatever the business is. Is there a strategic, someone in the industry that would be ideal to buy this business, right? So we'll definitely look at that whole picture and reach out to those people that we think are appropriate. And then, we also have our contacts. So those are bankers, lawyers, accountants who, we'll send that teaser to. And if they have someone in their database, they're saying, hey, I've got a client that wants to buy XY type of business, then, I'll send them your way. And so we've got those, and they're vetted because they're vetted by that referral. And finally, I'd say one of the things that kind of differentiates us some of the other players in our market is we're part of an association called Cornerstone International. And there are 28, I believe, M&A firms similar to us in the lower mid-market, operate in very similar industries. And I'd say the majority of them are in the United States. There's some in Netherlands, there's some in England, there's one in Japan. But it really does give us a lot of breadth when we're actually marketing and trying to find buyers, because we do share our deals throughout the network, and it gives us, another place to actually find buyers.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. And it's interesting because we do talk about the most common question is where do buyers come from? But in reality, our experience is that finding buyers isn't the most challenging piece of the equation. And I think it has to do with how we run our process. I mean, obviously, locally, we've got deep networks. Folks are reaching out to us. They come to our website. Folks are constantly looking for opportunities, qualified opportunities. We work closely with many lenders. Obviously, they have a vested interest in funding these transactions. And then, as you mentioned, beyond just the regional borders, we're looking at a global scale. And oftentimes, there's some great people in the US or even beyond.
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely have a wide network. And like you said, it's usually finding a buyer is not the difficult part. And we know that throughout that network, even the nichest industry, there's usually a buyer for that business.
Right. And for those of you who want to learn more, we did a previous episode with our VP, Thomas Bevilacqua, talking about where do buyers come from. That's a great episode. He really dives into the different types of buyers, where we typically come across them, what they're looking for when buying a business. But I would highly recommend checking out that episode as well. All right, Ryan. So we've talked about market outreach, finding buyers, qualifying them, making sure we've got quality people coming in. Obviously, that's an important step, but now we're entering negotiation and due diligence. Can you walk me through at a very high level what this phase looks like?
Yeah, and just to step it back, we've went to market with that SIM. We've done all the marketing, and now people are actually reaching out to us, right? So again, we vetted everybody, but now it's the point where they're giving us offers. Right. So we're at that LOI stage where you might get 5 or 6 letters of intent. They're meeting with the sellers. Before you actually sign that letter of intent, you've got to meet with the sellers and the buyer. So they're meeting. Our sellers are asking them questions because they want to make sure there's a good fit between the buyer and seller. And once they've kind of went through that a little bit, they truly say, which letter of intent am I going to sign? Because once you sign that letter of intent, there's a little bit of a lockup period during due diligence. So, those meetings are really crucial to make sure there's a fit between that buyer and seller, because you're probably going to have to work with each other for a little bit after the closing. So you want to make sure that works, right? So you go through that, you sign that, and then we get into the fun due diligence part.
Right.
And a little bit of negotiations, because before that, you sign that letter of intent, you probably say, well, here's the 3 people I really want to work with. Let's see if we can push a little bit on what they've offered, right? Before we actually sell. A lot of times, and I'll be honest, in the lower mid-market, there's not a ton of wiggle room, right? Because a lot of it's to deal with bank financing. So where the wiggle room a lot of times is the deal structure. Can we change that deal structure? Can we get terms that the seller wants? The seller only wants to stay on for 6 months. Can we push that instead of the buyer only wants them there for 12 months? Are there other things that we can push and kind of negotiate and go back and forth? And this process, you may be like, oh, they gave a letter of intent, we should get it signed, tomorrow. No, it usually takes a little bit, but back and forth, and the lawyers like to get a little bit involved here too to make sure everything on those LOIs are kosher. And then once we do that, we get that LOI signed.
Right. And I would say this is the phase that would bring out kind of the highest emotion in the seller. I mean, they're now really coming to grips that their business is truly, being valued by the market. They're now moving toward that closing. Things are getting very real. And I think what's important to keep in mind too, this is really, I would say, where we earn our keep as M&A advisors. We're looking at the different offers. We're ensuring that everyone's sharpening their pencil. I know you said there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of sale price, but in terms of transition time, fit, how much money is a buyer putting in? All of these things are being scrutinized and examined. Is there anything else that you would say is really critical during this phase prior to signing the LOI?
Yeah, and it does. It comes back to us. We're continually vetting that actual, the actual buyer. So we're saying, hey, can you've closed other deals? Can we talk to some? Can we get some references? Can we do all the things that we think are needed? Can we, talk to your banker or send you to our banker to make sure that you actually can buy this business, right? So we're trying to do all the things that we can do to vet that actual buyer before you sign on the LOI, because there's going to be a couple of probably LOIs at the table, and you want to make sure that at this point, we choose the correct one.
Right. And I would say at this juncture, the key aspect or the key element at the end of the day is all the planning has been done. The process is in place, trust the process, and you've got a good deal team around, right? So this is where the lawyer would come in. This is where the accountant would chime in, making sure that the structure of the LOI makes sense.
Exactly.
So Ryan, I know there's a lot of information that we're talking about here. We talked about getting the right buyer, getting an LOI, ensuring the deal team is involved and everyone is looking at it. As a business owner, emotions higher. We're supposed to trust the process. What should I really be fixated on or focused on as the seller at this point in time?
Yeah, what we always tell any sellers, don't take your foot off the gas, because during this whole point where there's a lot of due diligence, they're looking at all your information. If all of a sudden your numbers start to fall off, that can cause a retrade in price. So they could say, you know what, your numbers aren't there. We're not trusting your numbers. And we see a lot of people, sometimes they're like, okay, I've sold the business, or they think they've sold the business. And so now I'm just going to lighten up a bit. And all of a sudden the numbers come down, right? And that's a real concern to the actual person, looking at the business. So that's what the seller needs to do. On our side, we're doing everything. We're that middle person. So we're the, dealing with the accountants that are doing the due diligence. We're dealing with the lawyers. We're trying to keep you as much as we can out of all that talk. We're making sure that when a buyer comes in and says, well, there's this issue, that we deal with that issue and say, it's not an issue that should mean that the price should change. We already told you that in the same. That's why we spent all that time in that upfront process. So at this point, we've got all the leverage. We can say nothing has changed. We told you everything, and it's really effective because we have done that. We've done all that legwork upfront.
Right. So at the end of the day, the seller can really rely on the M&A advisor. They should really be focused on, driving their business forward so that there's no material change during the closing process. And obviously due diligence, a lot of this stuff, the table's been set up front. We know what's in the data room. This is the point in time where buyers said, okay, I've signed an LOI. We're moving into due diligence, which means just verifying the information in the SIM. Is there anything else that the buyers and their advisors are looking at?
I wouldn't. It's not too much more. Like, they really are making sure that like I said, make sure that business is running, making sure that they get information in a timely manner. So one of the big issues is a lot of times, a buyer will say, I need this, whatever, right? I need to know your current inventory, and it takes 2 weeks for the seller to get back. Well, what does that do? It's not going to change the price, but it's going to push that closing date. And the longer that date's pushed, the more likely that something may happen in the business, right? So you just got to get that information back in a timely manner. And that sometimes means pushing your advisors, or we push your advisors and say, get us that information yesterday, basically, right?
So you're talking about the information to load the data room, prepare marketing materials, right? So Ryan, this is a very exciting time for the seller. It's also very stressful. A lot of the elements are now outside the seller's control. Call this the closing phase, the final phase. We're also nearing the end of the 12-month or 9-month journey, depending on how long it's taken, typically 9 to 12 months. What is the seller facing at this juncture? What's going through their head, and what should they be doing? What are they thinking about?
Yeah, really at this juncture, it's really just nerves, right? Like, is this going to close? It's a week away. All these papers are going back and forth. Lawyers are talking. And generally these things, they go on without a hitch because we're there we're negotiating, talking, making sure the process runs smoothly. But it's just nerves. Like everyone gets nervous until that money is actually in their lawyer's account and being distributed to everyone, right? So how do you deal with it? I mean, it'd be nice to say take a vacation, but you can't because there are papers you're going to need to sign. But try to just distance yourself from it. But we know there's going to be emotions, and a lot of times it's not even the emotions of am I going to get my funds? It's the emotions of we've talked about it a couple of times in other episodes. I'm giving up my identity. Now it's real, right? It's just at that point where it's real. The company is going to be gone, and now I'm doing the next phase of my life.
Right, and oftentimes too, I find that the seller is thinking about what the next phase looks like. They're thinking about the transition plan. They're thinking about what partnering with the buyer looks like. They're also dealing with their lawyer and getting ready to sign. On the other side of the fence, they're thinking about the buyer, getting financing, making sure that gets handled. There's so much going on, but at the same time, it's exhilarating and exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely a whirlwind. Like near the end of that close, things are going everywhere, and communication is back and forth. Usually at this point, you're not having too many hiccups. It's just more, hey, we need to get these things buttoned up, and maybe there's a little bit of lawyers back and forth and saying this word needs to be changed, word needs to be changed, but it's not deal killing at this point.
Right. So, and I think this is really where the quality lawyer that you brought into the deal team earns their stripes. I mean, they're buffering you from, let's say, discussions that you really shouldn't be involved with. We see, the Uncle Bob lawyer who was brought in, who's really not qualified. This is where you can see things go off the rails if you don't have the right deal team. Even though the stage has been set, you've got the price. Oftentimes we see people trying to retrade. They're not accepting of terms that are market. This is where the stress level is the highest, and yet sometimes the train can come off the tracks without the right people.
Definitely, this is where the deal team that you've created makes the most sense, right? Like we've seen deals where they've used a lawyer that they've had for 20 years and it's not specialized in M&A, and all of a sudden they're picking at something that doesn't need to be picked at, or they're bringing something to the seller's attention that probably didn't need to be. It's just getting them more amped up, and sometimes that creates arguments that really don't need to be created. And really on both sides, the buyer and the seller probably don't need to hear everything until there's really a critical issue that they might need to address. Those really good lawyers, those really good deal team advisors, they buffer that until a point that they have to be involved.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And so I guess at this point, we've discussed each stage in great detail. We've talked about some episodes that you can reference for more in-depth coverage on those issues. And obviously, I mean, this is kind of like the final piece at the end of the day. Sellers get to sell. We believe that if they follow the process, they will get to the finish line. This is where they reap the rewards of all the hard work over all the numerous years. And I want to thank you, Ryan, for joining me today and contributing to this episode.
Thanks for having me.
And if you want to get in touch with myself or Ryan, please feel free to check us out on LinkedIn or contact us by email. You can reach me at jim.friesen@portagemadvisory.com or ryan.buist@portagemadvisory.com. Please remember to like or subscribe to keep this podcast handy, and we'll see you next time.